Welcome back to Politics Tonight, everyone. Thank you very much for staying with us on the program. Our next focus is tax reform bills recently approved by the House of Reps. But before we get into a conversation tonight, let's listen to the lawmakers.
After a week-long retreat, the Haddock Committee on Tax Reform Bills laid its reports on Tuesday. 48 hours later, the reports are the sole business of the day. Chairman of the committee, James Faleke, moves for the consideration of the reports and gives a synopsis of the recommendations. The Speaker commends the efforts of the committee, acknowledging that there was no dissenting voice among the members.
I've never seen in my history here in the National Assembly where a report is endorsed 100% unanimously by all members except these.
At the Committee of the Whole, the House carried out a clause-by-clause consideration of the recommendations on the 4 bills.
Clause 39.
For value-added tax purposes for states, it approved that 50% be distributed equally, 20% to be shared based on population, and 30% based on consumption.
There was a call for deletion of the proposed reintroduction of inheritance tax under the guise of taxation of family income, as this oversteps divine jurisdiction.
The House also agreed to retain the current 7.5% VAT as it rejected proposed staggered increase to 15% by 2030. Some of the lawmakers speak on the committee's efforts.
We also say thank you to Mr. President for considering it worthy to amend our tax laws. Our tax laws have been as old as 1959, some 1960-something.
What we did was an offshoot of the submissions that we got from the public. The injection that Nigeria needs for it to move into the Committee of Nations has been applied. The House of Reps has sanctioned it, so we wait on the Senate to do the same.
The process was very transparent, and they engaged us from beginning. Even when there were reservations, both the chairman of the committee, both the consultant, both the executive adjusted to reflect the desire of Nigerian people.
The House gives approval to the appointment of 1 representative each from the 36 states on the board of the Nigeria Revenue Service Establishment Bill. The House of Representatives is satisfied with its legislative interventions on the tax bill so far, and as Nigerians await the passage of the bills and assent by President Bola Tinubu, hopes are that the benefits so canvassed in the bills will impact positively on their lives and the nation's economy. Joke Edsa, TVC News, Abuja.
Right, Honorable James Faleke and his colleagues speaking there. Tonight, Saken Okolugbo, Consultant Communications and Strategy Officer of the President of the Senate, joins me on the program for some perspectives on this latest development, particularly the key changes and what this means to an average Nigerian and business owners. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Right. So these bills underwent 3 full days of public hearings with input from over 80.
No, it wasn't just 3 days. You know, the
Okay.
Senate started first. Okay. The Senate had 2 days and the House of Rep had 3 days. You would agree that for this bill to pass, there must be a concurrent between the House of Reps and the Senate. And it's beautiful to see that the House of Rep has taken the lead in terms of the bill at the moment. Yeah. And you notice the Senate was resolute. If the Senate wasn't resolute, initially when this bill was kicked against, the House of Rep was very divided, but the Senate on the 26th of November actually had allowed this bill pass the second reading. And no, by the time the bill gets to third reading, which is exactly what you have seen that has happened in the House of Rep, it becomes a law. And so those contentious areas were still being debated in the House of Rep while the Senate had moved on to the public hearing. But what has happened now is that there has been a harmonization. The first 2 days for the hearing that was done by this Senator Musa-led Committee on Finance had over 50 submissions from different interest groups from the public. Then the House continued 3 days. They had over 80. So we have an aggregate of over 100 consultants, tax managers, chartered accountants, and so many interests were taken into consideration, because if you look at that bill, you see 7.5% has been retained for VAT. A lot of people were kicking against the 10%. I was on your sister program, Yori, when I clearly said that I didn't think that 10% was going to fly. That same bill has actually also taken into consideration the military personnel. Yes. to remove them from personal income tax. And that same bill has also taken into consideration the fact that those who are earning 1 million and below, which is like the minimum wage, would not pay tax. And businesses 50 million and below will not pay tax.
What does this mean for an average Nigerian?
What it means for an average, what it means for an average Nigerian is that the poor will not be paying tax, the rich will pay the tax. And so compliance becomes more and the revenue generation for the country increases. Because if you look at it, a budget of 55 trillion, almost 55 trillion, 54.9 trillion, it has a borrowing of about deficit of about 13 trillion. And you have a recurrent of, about 14 trillion, and you have a recurrent of about 13 trillion. There's no way you can meet this heavy budgetary provisions if you don't have an alternative source of income. And that's exactly what President Bola Ahmed Tinubu did through the tax bill. And that's the wisdom the Senate President Godswill Akpabio saw in being very resolute on holding on the fact that this tax bill was a means to an end. And also Abbas, the Speaker of the House of Reps, also keyed into it, even though there was so much contentions in House of Reps. Because you see, what was being done was people were just playing politics of the North and Southern dichotomy, talking about the Northern Governors Forum. But by the time the Governors Forum came together, they understood what Oyedele saw. And they said, okay, 50% will be for equity, 30% for derivation, and 20% for population. Remember, Oyedele was proposing 60% for derivation, and people felt Lagos and Rivers were going to benefit. But in the real sense of it, Lagos and Rivers are going to be shortchanged because people are going to actually have their consumption tax being gotten at the point of where it is. It takes place. For example, you are making a call in Zamfara, you're making a call in my village, Biaruku. That's where the consumption tax is going to be paid, not in the headquarters of maybe either MTN, Globalcom, or any of the services that you're making the call from. And so a lot of people didn't look at this tax bill when they got emotional and were thinking of throwing away the baby and the bathwater, if I put it that way.
You know, the composition of the governing board was also revised. Section 7 now requires the board to include 6 executive directors appointed by the president from each geopolitical zone on a rotation.
That's the 6th geopolitical zone, which makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Additionally, also 1 representative from each state, and the FCT will sit on the board to ensure proper character representation.
Yes.
What's the significance of this?
Well, you know, you're going to have 4. You have the Nigerian tax bill. Don't forget, you have the you have the tax administrative bill. Now you have the Joint Revenue Board. Yeah. Then you have the Joint Revenue Service Establishment Bill, which is 4. It's actually 4. So the significance is that you're going to be dealing with 4 different, more like entities, which are very wide. Don't forget that by the time you have the Joint Revenue Board, you're talking about the states and the federal government coming together now. And so you are going to be able to protect the vulnerables. You know, you have had a lot of vulnerables that pay multiple tax. So you're not going to be able to, you're going to eliminate those multiple tax. You're going to have the ombudsman, you're going to have the appeal panel. And so I don't even think there are too much in terms of overseeing this very vast amount of services that are going to be rendered by the 4 bills that have been passed by the House of Reps and which will be concurred by the Senate once the Senate resumes.
Let's take other modifications in place. Section 13 talks about no qualifications for the secretary to the board who must be a lawyer, a chartered accountant, or chartered secretary at the level of assistant director or higher. And I'm more interested in the amendment of the funding of the NRS, which now introduces a fixed cost of collection rate.
No, but it's not cast in stone yet, because even if you concur to it, it doesn't mean that they might not tinker with it. Do you understand? This is the House of Rep version. Okay. The Senate is going to have its version and they're going to marry themselves. Well, it's going to be most likely the same thing. Do you understand? So what I'm trying to say is that some of these things will still be tinkered with.
Okay. Because I wanted to ask you for the evaluation of the tightening of the NRS borrowing powers, which Section 28, Nigeria Revenue Service requiring approval from both the Federal Executive Council and the National Assembly before any loans can be. If you ask me my opinion, that is very key, because that helps in checks and balances, and that's what they try to strengthen. So would it in any way checkmate borrowings by the states? Of course it will. It will, because before now, you know, the states, even when the states wants foreign loan, remember they always have to get the approval of the National Assembly. No state can actually borrow from any foreign country without the approval of the National Assembly and without the buy-in of its senators. You must also have to prove what you're going to use those loans for. So if you ask me, even as a public affairs analyst, I'll tell you that this is the best
position in terms of those checks, because a lot of loans that are taken are not even used for the purposes, sorry to say. And again, that was a major concern. And once again, the leakages. There have been a lot of leakages. You see people who collect tax.
We saw what happened in the States last
That's
year.
what I'm trying to say. So people should pay, and they come, and you are able to be exempted. And don't forget that the company income tax has been reduced from 30% to 25%. That's very key. Well, when people kicked against inheritance tax, a lot of people kicked against that, and the submissions were actually made. And one of the beautiful things is that has also been touched on. And I believe the Senate is also going to have to touch that too.
But a significant change was the establishment of what they call independent funding for the Tax Appeal Tribunal, freeing from dependence on the Federal Inland Revenue Service. They say this is to avoid conflict of interest.
That is exactly, you've just answered it already.
Is this a game changer?
It is, because you just said it already, to avoid conflict of interest and to be able to independently adjudicate in issues that you might not have to take positions or be emotional or without fear of favor, if I might put it that way. Basically.
Right, let's look at other modification. The committee also amended Section 77, introduced a new formula for distributing VAT revenues to local governments, ensuring that 70% is distributed equally and 30% based on population.
No. What's the deal for the VAT is, remember the federal government sacrificed 5%. So the states are going to get 55%. Okay. Local governments are going to get 35%, and the federal government is going to have 10%. That was the proposal. Federal government before now gets 15, states gets 50, and the local governments get 35. So they added more to the states. So I think that increases the revenue for which the states are going to get in terms of VAT. But then again, a lot of school of thought will tell you that a lot of people get lazy. They don't try to generate a revenue because they want to wait to just share tax. That's a lot of states and local governments. But I think this will also introduce healthy competition, because when you look at the 30% derivation, among states, because you have to know that by the time you generate more, you're going to get 30% of that in terms of derivation.
Do you understand that? Do these governors understand that?
The governors have to understand that, because they're looking for more money in terms of the fact that we're looking at a situation where we still have unemployment, we still have inflation. We're hoping that inflation will get to 15%. Even with the rebasing, we're not yet at 15%. Don't forget that the price of oil is now almost below $75, which is a benchmark. Exchange rate is 1,500. But the government has been able to keep exchange rate at 1,500. You must give it to the government. In the last almost 8 weeks or 9 weeks, it has even gone below 1,500, which is a benchmark. So when you look at all this, the states do not have any choice but to look inwards to be able to have that healthy competition in terms of getting 30% more of the derivation of what they are getting in terms of consumption, and not taking others.
But the point where we're talking about increased revenue generation,
extension
of income tax exemptions to specific agricultural businesses and military officers, why is this important?
Well, it's important because if you remember, the states were going cap in hand to collect money to pay salaries in the last administration. This is the first time that you see that maybe states are not really going cap in hand, because we have generated...
They got more money.
You just answered it. You just answered the question for me, because they got more money. So this also helps in that regard. You understand what I'm trying to say? Because
don't get me wrong. They got more money, but they're not generating more.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Now they're getting more money, but have also forgotten that the value of the naira to the dollar has also increased. So the more money they get, the more... Well, they say the more money you get, the more problems you come across. This is a general saying. The more they need to spend. So that's more money that they have to generate is something they must actually sit down to generate. Because when people talk of restructuring, I come from the South, when we keep saying, we want to control our resources, it's because we believe in the fact that we have the oil, and they see 13% is not enough in terms of what we should be getting in the South. A lot of the governors are already talking about 30% too. For oil, if you can give 30% for VAT, you should be able to give us 30% for oil derivation for the 6 states, for the areas that, 9 states that you have oil, which is what is a mono economy that is sustaining the economy. So this terms of, if you take 30% off for oil derivation, you will force those states who don't have oil to look inwards, those states that have mineral resources. We've been talking about Nigeria beyond oil, an alternative source of revenue. Agriculture and mining hasn't done so well, and that is why the president is very particular about tax, because there's no nation that can grow without tax. That's the absolute truth. But don't also forget the basic habits of people towards paying tax is very poor. 30% of Nigerians pay tax. A lot of them say they provide their water, they provide their services, they don't see good roads, they don't see, you know, they give all the excuses. Why should I have to pay tax? So all those things will now help to change that orientation.
Because
to
I
a
wanted
large
to say,
extent.
taking into cognizance the history of this country and how peculiar we are as a people, how optimistic are you that the Nigeria Revenue Service would enhance seamless tax harmonization and administration?
I think with what this tax reform bill has done, don't forget that there are some obsolete laws that predate even colonial days. Do you understand? So what I think it will do is that it's going to check the leakages, it's going to enhance services. People can now see, and just like what the Senate President said, they will have to put checks and balances to ensure that the funds that are derived from this tax that is coming in are able to be checkmated by the committees that will be in charge so that there will be no leakages. It's leakages that usually cause a lot of issues in terms of those funds when they come in. Now, when people see that these funds are rightly applied, they will be encouraged to pay more, especially those companies. For example, companies have been reduced from 30% to 25%. You expect that more companies would participate in paying income tax now. And those who are 50 million naira and below are not going to pay. So it also that doesn't mean that you will not aim to make 50 million and above because you want to run away from tax. And we put those checks and balances. I go to restaurants, I see VAT. Some people tell me that they have different receipts, that they have the receipts for the government and they have their own receipts because we pay very huge taxes in terms of VAT.
All right, then. Interesting conversation. I mean, it's good to see that the House of Reps has approved this. We'll wait for the Senate.
Yes, definitely the Senate will be concurring. I cannot.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Sakeno Okolugbo.
It's my pleasure.
Communications and Strategy, Office of the President of the Senate. Thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
Politics tonight. And thank you very much for watching, everyone. That's our package tonight. I'll see you again on Monday. Good night, everyone.